and thank you all for attending. My name is Michael Thompson. I'm the Facilities and Operations Manager at Berkeley Regional Services, which, if you're not at the Berkeley campus, we are a shared services center, which is about 2 miles from campus. I'd like to extend a warm welcome to everyone, especially those who are attending from other UC campuses. Welcome to Berkeley's full day of career development, which is so fantastic. Wherever you live in California, finances are of concern. So I have the honor to introduce my colleague and who I'm getting to know on the Now Committee, Dave Schonenberg. I've heard Dave speak before. He's done a fantastic job. I'm looking forward to today. We'll get so much out of it. I've seen the slide deck. There's lots of material and it's fantastic. Please don't turn away from any of it. Today's topic, it's called Snowball, Harnessing the Power of Compound Interest in Life and Finance. And Dave is going to talk about that in life and finance. It's good stuff. The format, we'll listen. It'll be a quick hour and then we'll open up for question and answers. We'll have the chat feature on the side. We'll save the chat. So if you want to provide your email and any contact information, please do so. And Dave will have a transcript of the chat for his reference. So with that, I'd like to introduce Dave Schonenberg.
Thank you, Michael. Hopefully you can hear me. And thank you, Teresa, for the AV support. Welcome to Snowball. I'm Dave. I was listening to Aiko's opening remarks, and I hope everyone did too, and maybe I can contribute something to figuring out how you can live that life free of imposed limits, right? Today, I'm going to talk about the magic of compound interest, the FIRE movement, what that is, and the 4% rule. A big, complicated question with a really easy solution. How much do I really need to retire? We'll talk about how it doesn't really matter so much how you make, it's how much you save. Some unique tax advantages for UC staff. Also, the different retirement buckets we have available to us, typical risks and hurdles. And I'll encourage everyone to automate everything just to keep it simple and reduce stress. And then if there's time, we can tie in how some of these concepts can apply to your life and career. Disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm just a staff member who finds myself enthusiastically explaining this stuff to my colleagues all the time. There are a lot of financial situations in the room, from early career to nearing retirement. So I'm going to throw numbers out here that are generalized. Everyone's situation will be unique. Einstein once said, "This thing was the most powerful force in the universe. This thing was man's greatest invention. This thing was the eighth wonder of the world." Einstein had a good sense of humor, so he was joking, I think, when he said that compound interest is the eighth wonder of the world. He who understands it earns it, he who doesn't pays it. But because he said it, gives it some weight, right? Why is compound interest the eighth wonder of the world, and why do people call it magic and things like that? There's ways to explain it with more math, but it's just simply interest on interest. And I like the analogy of a snowball, right? You have a snowball, you have $1, you start rolling it down the hill, it starts picking up things as it gets bigger and bigger and bigger every year. And it's all about time. So in this simple graphic I picked off the internet, $1,000 at 2% per year. Well, first year we'll get 20%, the next year we'll get $40.40, the next year 61, the next year 82, and so on and so on and so on. Oops, went too fast there. So compound interest, what makes it magic is that even a small rate of return, and I'll use the words interest and rate of return sort of interchangeably, even a small rate of return can double depending on timing. So here a chart, $100,000, someone's life savings rate. They invested, it makes 5% a year. 14 years later, it's doubled with them taking no action, right? And here's a quick hack, the rule of 72. If you want to know how long it's going to take your cash to double in a savings account or investment account, just take the time is the number of years. So 72 divided by rate is the number of years. Here's a table. So 1% would take 72 years to double, right? 19% would take almost just a little over 3 years to double. This is not precise, and you can read more about the rule of 72, but it generally works. So it's a good guideline. And as you can see here, just going from 72 years to double to a 5%, 14 years to double. You see how this snowballing starts to work. And here's an example, another one. Andrea has $100,000 life savings. She makes 8% interest. That's the average return of the US stock market, right? It takes 9 years to double. If she just leaves it in there for 24 years, that's her entire retirement. She has $800,000. And I will be going through this very quick, as Michael alluded to, but I intend everyone to go back to the slides and click on all the links that I put in there. The dark side of compounding is debt. So if you have a high interest rate on your debt, it doesn't take too long for that to double. So sorry if this is kind of a grainy graphic, but this is another visualization of this phenomenon, right? I'm seeing a lot in the chat. I hope Michael will let me know if I'm having any technical difficulties or anything. So in this example, Leandra saves $2,000 a month. Kevin saves $5,000 a month. But Leandra ends up with more money just because of timing, right? She ends up investing less. So very simply, everyone should be saving more, right? Save more now is the key, because timing is everything when it comes to compounding. Save, save, save. Another graphic I pulled from the internet is that 1 in 3 Americans has zero, right? And only 13% over here on the right have 300,000 or more saved for retirement, which is 300,000 won't support very much spending in retirement. Let's just put it that way. So that's kind of a scary metric, right? When you look at their savings rate in 2020, it's actually quite interesting. You look over here, it was down below 10%, and then it spiked during the pandemic to over 30% because people were afraid, people weren't spending, lots of different reasons. And a historical perspective for the last 20 years, you can see how this spiked. Over the year, it averaged out being above 15%. So I've talked about compounding, and what is FIRE? It's this financial independence, retire early movement, and acronym that people often use. Lots of people have different ideas of what it is, but essentially it's just building up this snowball, right? Until you have enough passive returns from your interest, right? To cover your annual expenses, at which point you can start doing a little bit more what Aiko was talking about, which was you don't have to retire, right? But you can start focusing your career entirely on what is working for your interests and your impact, not just money. So how much do I need to retire? This is a big question. And a lot of times people say $1 million, which might be accurate. But it totally depends on your situation. It's actually very simple. All you need to know is what your annual spending in retirement will be, multiply it by 25, and that's your retirement number. And I'll explain why, because it's something called the 4% rule. The 4% rule says that for any given pile of money that's invested, you can take out 4% without withdrawing any of the principal, right? And so I use this bucket on the bottom, right? Once your bucket is full, you can live off of what spills out without ever dipping into the bucket, right? That's what a safe withdrawal rate is. And safe withdrawal rate is based on this study from the 90s, and it's held up over time. And there's a lot you can read into it, but visualizing it, I said $1 million earlier, right? And a lot of people say you need $1 million to retire. $1 million, you'll see here, with a safe withdrawal rate of 4%, supports annual spending of $40,000. So if in retirement you want to spend $40,000 a year, you need to save up $1 million. But what's really interesting is if you in retirement, you somehow shave $4,000 a year of spending off, whatever you kill your Starbucks habit, you quit smoking, whatever it takes, whatever you do in retirement, you pay off your house, you don't commute anymore, you sell a car, whatever it is, you reduce that spending by $4,000 a year, you have to save 100,000 less. And these numbers get really interesting when you get down to really lower costs of living, right? People don't have to save that much to support that cost of living. So what about the pension? Lots of people in this room are on the pension. I'm going to send you all off onto all these retirement calculators and everything. But what you need to know is don't think of your pension as you're adding this to your savings, because it's too much to unpack. What it really is it's something that's reducing your annual spending, because you're not actually retiring, right? You're still making income. It's just deferred compensation. So you reduce that from your annual spending. You can estimate your pension payments. I put a link here. And there's a couple of examples of different scenarios at UC Retirement, and you can use the Planning Center. The pension is factored in on the Planning Center tool in Fidelity. Here's just another visualization of it. The 4% rule assumes a 50-50 stock bond portfolio. And what it is this is an absolute worst case scenario. So the absolute worst time to retire was 1966. Inflation was, as you were withdrawing 4% every year, inflation was taking away what that could buy. The best year to retire in the study was 1877. This is a big study. So what higher rates of withdrawal are actually possible with different luck and different portfolios. Safe withdrawal rate assumes a 30-year retirement. So if you're getting really ambitious on having a longer retirement, if you're one of these financial independence, early retirement sprinters, right? You're talking about a longer than 30-year retirement, right? Typical retirement assumes retire at 65 and die at 95. You may have a longer time, right? I put a link here to the Ivy League endowments, because what they use is something called a perpetual withdrawal rate. They have their endowment and they never want the principal to ever be spent. They only want to spend the gains. So you can look at what they invest in here at this link. And you can also go to this with withdrawal rates link that I put. So you can see how your current portfolio stacks up. Do you have a 4% rate or maybe more? This is a quote from my dad. It's not how much you make, it's how much you keep. That stuck with me. And you'll see it takes advantage of compounding, right? If you keep more early on in your career, you take advantage of compounding, right? So it's all about savings rate. So if you extrapolate out the 4% rule, like how much you need to save, but base it on a savings rate, you get these very interesting takeaways, right? So at the top here, if you save 5%, your typical American savings rate, if you save 5% each year, you'll build up a big enough snowball that you can retire at 66 you can work for 66 years. And then you can live off the 4% rule. But a bump just up to 10% shaves 15 years off of that person's working career, right? Because they're putting more away, it's compounding more. If you go to 15%, look how many years are starting to be shaved off, 20 years. Fortunately, through our automatic payroll deductions at UC, we're putting in 7%, being matched 8%, and it's about 15%, right? So we're all in pretty good shape, right? But I'm encouraging everyone here to look in addition to that. See what you can do in addition to that to start shaving even more time off your career. And whether that's leaving your actual career and stop working or refocusing your career on something else. When I talk about FIRE movement, right? These are folks who are obsessed with turning this on its head, right? Making money in a short period of time and saving it all and living super cheap, sucking away all their money so they only have to work for less than 10 years, right? These folks are at this other end of the spectrum. And at the complete other end of the spectrum, we have someone who inherited their wealth and never needs to work, right? Off the chart the other way would be a negative savings rate, someone who spends more than they take in. They need to turn things around. So yeah, shaving 20 years off of your working career just by saving 10% more. This is another visualization of that same table, right? But you can see it becomes harder and harder to ever make it to retirement with low savings rates because you just have to save so much more, and you're not taking advantage of compounding. So it's all about the savings rate. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean how much you make, right? So person number one makes $100,000 a year, person number two makes 60. They both have 17-year careers if they save 50%. It all depends on this savings ratio, how inflated their lifestyle gets with their spending. Here's another one. Here's someone makes $100,000 a year, right? They're making good money, but person number one has an American savings rate, right? 10%. They're gonna spend 51 years working, right? And then person number two saves a lot of money. They save $60,000 a year. They save what would be an entire salary for someone else, right? They only have to work at this rate for 12 and a half years to support their $40,000 a year spending. So they just shaved almost 40 years of 40-hour work off of their career. These are interesting considerations. And most people in this room are on the pension, right? And the pension is really fantastic. It's low risk. California is very powerful. It's not like some of the other states where their pensions are falling apart. It's guaranteed monthly income. You don't have to worry about where the market's going to be here or then. You don't have to worry about management changing on your portfolio, rebalancing. You have very predictable taxes. And when we're looking at that other chart about annual spending, along with Social Security, your monthly spending could be very, very low, the amount that you need to supplement. I put a link in here to a good calculator that has adjustments for pension, and I'll include more links at the end. Pension gives you this investing paradox, right? I said at the beginning, I'm not a financial advisor. I'm not telling you what to invest in or anything like that. I'm merely telling everyone to save more money. But one of the interesting things about the pension is because you have this guaranteed income, you can take these sort of more risky things with your small part of your SNOP to see if you can retire earlier. Where at the same time, you don't necessarily need to take the risk where someone who doesn't have a pension. Like the situation I was in before I came to Berkeley, I only had the 401k to work with. So I had to invest in stocks, right? Because of the low returns. Pension gives you this great diversification, but don't think of it as a part of your portfolio. Think about it as just income in retirement. I'm going to throw a lot at you, but at the basis, just set a goal, figure out what your snowball number is, right? I want $1 million to support $40,000, right? How are you going to get there? This is what we'll get into. I'll try to maximize my tax advantage accounts. I'll invest in the easiest, lowest pain options. And the other advice is just to invest early and often. This is sage old advice because of compounding. And often because you ride out the ups and downs of the market. Don't get too stuck up in it. The enemy of a good plan is a perfect plan. And I'll talk about how to automate things at the end. So very simply, figure out what your number is. Figure out how to keep more of it, whether that's by doing things like going to this conference to figure out how you can make more. Or start thinking about things how you can spend less, because both of them have the equal effect. Develop a simple strategy with annual check-ins or automations wherever you can. Take a close look at fees, taxes, and try to reduce any waste, right? So, and then again, we'll talk about automating this at the end. So know your number. Like I said earlier, all you need to know is 25 to get a rough idea of what you need. All you need to know is 25 times your annual spending. So you can base that on your spending report. Like you just go on your credit card if you spend your money on credit cards, and look at the reports that they provide. Add your rent to it, figure it out. Or make a budget now and figure out what your monthly spending is. And if you tighten here or cancel this or that, right? What can get that number up 5%? How can you get that 5% to shave a couple more years off of your working for money rather than working for yourself, right? Or a third way is to just look at retirement. Like if your house is going to be paid off, your kids are going to be not taking money from you anymore, adjust accordingly and multiply it by 25. Then you have sort of this number, this light at the end of the tunnel. I'm going to share this slide again at the end. There's tons of calculators out there. They're really fun. one that will probably inspire you to save a little more rather than just hustling to make more is Your Money or Your Life. Vicki Robbins, the high priestess of fire, she wrote the book Your Money or Your Life that inspired all the other bloggers and everyone that comes along with it. She calls it your real hourly wage. So how much do you actually make after you factor in commute? This changed for everyone in the last year, wardrobe, all that. How much do you actually make after the expenses of working? So keeping more is not just about making more, right? This is like a two-front battle. You want to make more, right? So you're at this conference, you want to fight for a raise every year, you want to work hard and get your 3%, you want to apply for higher paying jobs at Berkeley, you want to hustle a little bit on the side. Another thing you can do really right now, and I'll talk about this, is pay less taxes. Just use the accounts that are available to us to pay 5% less in taxes every year. And then use your skills. This is a plug for my talk last year, Hack Your Job in 10 Days. You have 10 development days at work. You might as well compound those, right? So get paid while you are upping your skills. But on the other side of this, of making more, there is cutting habits, cutting things that just drag your monthly budget every year. Junk food, smoking, video games, gambling. What's your poison arrow there, right? We all have one. No shame. But if it's bad for you, it's probably expensive. Think about what it's costing you in years of work. When you reduce these habits, you spend less forever. You just reduce that number. You drastically reduce the size of that snowball. Remember, if you spend $2,000 less a year, you have to save, what was it? $100,000 less, $50,000 less. Think about paying it forward. Don't think about depriving of yourself of things in the short term. Think of all those people who deprive themselves of things in the long term by not saving. I'll come back to this one. There are ways to put all your accounts in one place. There's a useful tool called Personal Capital. We'll come back to that at the end. So wealth is what you don't see. I think this is another quote from my dad. Wealth is what you don't see. I would see a Lamborghini Countach. I had the poster on my wall, right? It's the coolest car. And I would see one drive by and I would be like, that person is rich. And my dad would say that person was rich until they bought the car, right? So visualize your future. Are these spending habits you're taking part in today, are they worth it really in these years of work, right? If you visualize what your future is, you might not even be able to have that habit anymore, right? Depending on the choices you make. A couple notes, healthy habits tend to be cheaper. Getting great outdoors, making your own food, reading books, all affordable stuff, right? $10 a day at the cafe, right? Getting a coffee, a pastry. I used to do that when we were in the office all the time. Cable. I put $50 to $70 a month. I know people who are paying over $100 a month for cable, right? This is adding years, maybe even a decade to someone's career. So cultivate these good spending habits for life and you'll start snowballing, right? Because your annual spend would be less. And also think about Earth. We're in a time where there's a lot of pollution and climate change. And when we're driving around a lot, we're spending a lot of money, we're burning gas, we're buying packaging, things to consider. I'm going to throw a little bit of financial advice here, right? First, before you start investing in anything, build up your emergency fund, pay off your debt, then move into investing, right? And when you're ready to invest, what I'm going to suggest you do is take full advantage of this tax situation by using UC's pre-tax contributions. It comes out of your paycheck pre-tax. So it lowers the amount that you pay each month in tax. And I have a click through at the end of here. So I'm going to explain how to do this, but what I want everyone to do here is just, if you're only doing the minimal contribution, which is UC's pension program, you're not supplementing anything. I really want everyone to just try to up it by 1%, because in doing so, you're going to log on there. You're going to learn how to do it. You're going to have a good habit of, I know how to do this. And then once you're in there, if you in fact want to save more, it'll be really easy for you to do. And here's where it gets complicated, right? 401ks, we don't have those. We have a 403b. There's another one called a 457. There's after tax. There's IRAs, Roth IRAs, HSAs. There's tons of it. I mean, each person's situation is unique, but we are in a very good spot to save money on taxes because we work at Berkeley or UC. I know we have some other attendees here. We have the UC defined contribution plan, right? Which requires us to take out 7% and they match 8%. If you're in the savings program, it's like a 401k match. If you're in the pension, it's not necessarily 8, but they pay their share into the pension program. And then you can also add after-tax deductions. We have our own version of the 401k called the 403b. The big one about this is you can take loans from it if you pay it back without penalty. And then the last one is 457b, which is the early retirees secret sauce right here. And I don't think this was ever intended for early retirement, though. It was just a benefit for state employees like us. So this is a benefit that the IRS gives us, where it's like a 401k, but you can take the money out as soon as you leave Berkeley. You don't have to wait till retirement age. So you could have a mini retirement. You could take a break. You could try something out and return later. 457b is really unique. The big difference is you can't take a loan from it, right? Because you can take it out when you leave. And some advice for how to figure out where to put your funds, right? Because you can get overly complicated very easily. I like these cascading buckets that I found on DIYwaterfountains.com, right? Or here's another visualization, my clip art masterpiece here, right? So the garden hose is your money. It's your health insurance is coming out right before it's hitting the bucket. Some things are coming out. But once it's coming into your bank account, you need to fill up your emergency fund first, right? Then once that's full, flows out into high interest debt, right? If you're paying off credit card debts at a high rate, you need to knock those out before anything else. Then flow into your other accounts. Okay. Here's a really good savings order example of how to do this from a source called Boggleheads. The guy's name is Jack Bogle. He's a Sage financial advisor. And he has this group. It's not because it's mind-boggling. It's because his last name is Bogle. But I simplified it a little bit because we have different accounts here, right? So what I'm suggesting is emergency fund, right? Take care of yourself first, pay off your hydrogen, then start pouring these buckets into these unique plans, HSA, 457B, 403B, depending on your situation, right? So emergency fund is crucial, right? You need 6 to 12 months expenses for job loss, medical emergencies, car accident, whatever it is. That can seem really daunting to save up a whole year's of expenses. So think about what a medical emergency might entail, right? If you have insurance or if you're on the HSA and you have your deductible covered. About job loss. If you have a 457B, that covers you. You can use that money if you lost your job at Berkeley. Also, if you have a relatively low spending rate, you may be able to just live off the unemployment. And also remember that in your Roth accounts, I wouldn't advise taking money out of your retirement accounts unless it was for an absolute emergency, but you can take the principal out of your Roth and after-tax accounts. So some good ideas there. You can have a emergency fund and have some tax advantages too. Other considerations, for job loss, you may get severance, you may be able to adjust your spending temporarily, side hustle, etc. Financial advisors always say take the company match. My old company, I put 5% in, they put in 3.5%, something like that. We put in 7, they put in 8. It's really a fantastic match. We don't have a choice, so I'm not going to spend too much time there. But high interest debt needs to be prioritized because while you might hear in the news of somebody making a 17 or 24% return on the stock market, it's never guaranteed. But if you pay off your high interest debt at that rate, it's guaranteed that that's the fastest way you're going to get to this financial independence. So then once you have your debt paid off, right? If you're fortunate enough to be in this situation, right? A really interesting first account to max out is the HSA. Most people get this confused with the FSA. The HSA is the opposite. It's not use it or lose it. The funds are yours to keep forever. And it's not just money you put in. UC puts in money. You'll need to look into this to see if it's right for you. It was the only option at my former job, right? So look into it. But UC puts in $500 for single or $1,000 per family, and it's a high deductible plan. I won't get into it too much, but what's interesting about the HSA and why it's often called an ultimate retirement account, and why you should max it first if you can, is that when you do use it for medical bills, you're never taxed. It's a pre-tax deduction, and then you don't have to pay tax when you withdraw it for medical. So it's a way to double get around taxes, right? And just quickly to review how this works. And I think I am on time. 401k style traditional IRA and our 403b, 457b, your money comes out of your paycheck before tax, right? So your tax bill is lower. And so you get to save more. And that money grows tax-free. The gains grow, bigger, without being taxed every year, right? And then when you retire, you take out 1 year of expenses and you're taxed on that amount. Roth is different because you pay tax on it now. So you've already paid tax on it, but the gains, so if you invest $1 and it makes $1 in interest, right? You can withdraw $2 but at the end, but you only have to pay tax on the gain, right? Because you've already paid tax on the first part. HSAs are interesting because you never have to pay tax when used for medical expenses. And there's other ways to scheme it too that are kind of advanced, but I link to them at the end. And after you've done that, if HSA is right for you, I really recommend everyone here check out the 457B, because it's a 401k, it's an emergency fund, and if good luck in timing and markets go our way, right, you may be able to retire early on, right? So this is a super 401k style account, because you don't have to wait till you're 59 and a half to take the money out. No early withdrawal penalty. You can take it out as soon as you leave UC. So once your snowball is big enough, you can just say, now I'm starting to collect it. If you've made it that far, I would suggest looking into maxing out your 403B, and your order 457 or 403B maybe depend on whether you need to take a loan from it, right? Then you can start going into the other account options. And now this is just a sample, right? This is not right for everyone. This is for someone who wants to save as much as they can so they can retire as early as possible, right? And that's really attractive to everyone. And I know everyone's not in the same situation, right? I'm not necessarily even in that situation, right? But the information is so compelling, right, that you can shave years off. And once you've taken advantage of all the tax advantaged accounts, you can start looking at taxable accounts, right? I'll throw in the 529 education accounts here for people with kids. It's kind of like a Roth for education. People put money in there, your family members, and then the gains grow tax-free, right? And you can use it for education. A new thing, a piece of news, is that you can now use up to $10,000 a year for high school or elementary through high school education. Just another note for financial planning, it counts against you as a parental asset. So if you're filling out financial aid, you might want to donate to your grandparents, 529 instead. And then real estate. I'm no expert. I've never bought a house. I live in the Bay Area. It's been impossible for me. But I want to let everyone know that you can invest in real estate. You don't have to feel left out without buying a house. And you can do it with the tax benefits that we talked about before, and without any of the hassle. You can just invest in something called Reits, real estate investment trusts. And at UC, fortunately, we have a really easy one. You can do automatic payroll deductions, invest in the UC real estate fund. So they pool the money, they buy a commercial property, it makes money, you're a shareholder. So you can get a slice of that pie without buying a house. And if you are saving for a down payment on a house, you could consider putting instead of just a savings out, consider putting them into some kind of real estate trust that pays out a dividend, right? So then you can put your real estate dollars to work right away. And if you did it in one of our Roth accounts, you might be able to get some tax advantages too. And that, I just say with real estate, right? Real estate landlording, you can make a lot of money, right? But that's work, right? Now, and this is a talk about financial independence and not having to work. A link here to the New York Times rent versus buy calculator. I just plugged two random numbers in here. $750,000 house. For reference, I went on Zillow and I looked for one in Berkeley. and it doesn't exist. How long do you plan to stay? 30 years. Oops. And it shows here that if you can rent for it'll plug your number. Objectively, renting is better because you could conceivably save more, invest it, and come out on top. So I threw a lot at you. There's tons of links in the slides you can go back to, and there's a huge resource thing at the end. But quickly, just to recap, just encouraging everyone to save more now than the minimum. So figure out what your 25 times number is so that you can have light at the end of the tunnel. You might look at this information, plug in your pension numbers and think, wow, I could retire a lot sooner than I thought I did. I don't need to keep stacking credits if I have a little bit of tax savings on the side, right? Of course, allocate your emergency fund and pay off your debts first, and then start thinking about buckets flowing, just max one into the other, right? Make it really easy. You can think of your dollars as going back to compounding, right? And how you put $1 in, right? And then that dollar is just making more. And so every dollar you put away is just making more for you. A lot of people say they're soldiers, right? I like elves a little better, but soldiers, you're like building an army and they're making passive income for you. But they're also battling risks, right? And this is where we get into a little bit of asset allocation. I'm not going to advise anyone else to do anything. I'm just going to review it, right? You have your savings accounts. In the last 5-10 years, these have had historically low rates, right? When I was a kid, my first paycheck in my savings account for McDonald's was like 5%. Now it's less than 1. Or you could buy bonds, right? These are essentially you're loaning a government or a company money so they can raise money to build things. They pay you interest, right? That there's a risk of default. And then you have stocks where you buy little stakes of ownership in a company. Some pay dividends, which is like interest. When you buy stocks, so there's more risk, right? Because in the long term, you're saying, okay, Ford Motor Company, right, is putting out good products, right? But in the short term, you're subject to all these price swings and you have to rely on what the market thinks. So it's volatile, it's risky. And then you have things like Bitcoin, gold, pork bellies, commodities tradings, right? These things are highly speculative. They don't actually do anything. They're not really soldiers working for you, right? They're more risky, they're more volatile. And you know what? You can't use your UC retirement accounts to invest in them anyway, so I won't even consider them. And what UC recommends that you do as an asset allocation is stick in your 65 number, right? Your standard retirement number, age 65, figure out what that date is, and then put a target date fund. And these things are actually pretty good, right? And they suggest like, here's one for 2030, here's one for 30 years later, 2060. So in the near term, they have more bonds. They have almost 30% bonds, whereas they have less than 10% in the longer term, right? So the idea is that for the longer time frame, you can ride out the dips and peaks of the stock market, whereas in the short term, you don't want to be retiring right in a year of bad market returns, right? So this is really simple to use these target date funds, but you don't have to set the target date to 65, right? If you plan on a much earlier retirement, you may want to set the target date to whatever that date is that you plan to retire. And it would be a pretty safe allocation, right? So typically, if you were to just save your money to put all your savings in a savings account, right? You would have your bucket would be leaking, right? Because you pay taxes on it upfront, income tax, you pay taxes on it when you spend it. So here's a number of typical leaks and some quick fixes, right? Taxes, right? The big fix for taxes is tax advantage accounts. I'm going to jump into that right after this. Fees. Fees eat away at your retirement account. Accessing funds before retirement age. I talked a little about that, about different accounts that you can't reach if you want to retire, but you have to wait to get the money. Other risks, bad market timing. You get in at a bad time. You bought in the market in 1928 and you need to retire in 1931. The solution to that is not to put all your money in anywhere at one time and to drip it into the market, highs and lows. And the way you do that is automatic payroll deductions every 2 weeks. I'll skip down to a big risk is poor decisions due to psychological biases. When you remember when the stock market went way down in March of last year, that was when everyone was panicking. If you remember that one of those first slides I did when everyone's savings rate went up to 30%, if they had all bought at the bottom of the market, they would all be enjoyed one of the greatest run-ups in history, right? And psychological biases hurt so many people. They sell low, right? And also just losing money due to poor planning, poor optimizations, bad mix of investments. All this you can automate, right? By just doing a pre-tax payroll deduction into your 457B, 403B, whichever account you choose, and then sending it into target date funds, so you never need to rebalance or anything. That's just done for you. So biggest leak, and the one I think everyone here can agree on, right? If I said you could keep 5% more of your money, everyone would say yes, right? And say, okay, well, just instead of putting your money into a savings account, you put it into your pre-tax account. You're going to spend $5,000 less in taxes. Therefore, you can save more, right? You keep more money. This is the calculator from our UC Fidelity site. I just plugged in a salary of 60,000. I said tax rate 22%. I think that's right? I didn't even fill in state and local tax. I just said this person is contributing 35%, and you see what they gave us, right? That means this person can contribute $808, but it only reduces their paycheck by $630, right? So if you're scared about putting more money in, look at these calculators. If you're scared about putting $800 in, actually you're only reducing your paycheck by $630 because of these tax savings. Here's another non-UC calculator, right? I threw $60,000 again as the salary, $19,500 as the pre-tax retirement. That's the max for a 401k. That's the max for a 403b, right? So if you maxed it, that would be your savings rate. Now look at down here though. So this person saved $19,500, but only cost them $16,000. So they got $3,000 in free money just by putting in a different account. Otherwise, that money would have just gone straight to the IRS. And I know everyone has different feelings towards the federal government, but this is not like a cheat, right? These pre-tax accounts were set up by the IRS as a benefit for us state education employees, right? So we should take advantage of it. Another interesting thing is this person went from the 22% tax bracket, so I guess I was right in that previous slide, to the 12% bracket, right? Because their income is going down. So this person, they ended up getting $3,000 free, essentially. That's 5% of their income, right? If someone offers you a 5% boost, you take it, right? And so saving money in tax advantage accounts is huge. And at UC, we have this preposterous amount of tax advantage accounts that we can save it to. Like your standard person has the IRA, the Roth IRA to save. And if they have an HSA at work, they can save, $15,500. People who are lucky enough to have a company 401k, they get this $19,500 max that they can put away, right? But that's it. That's it for most people. That's the most tax advantage they can get. But at UC, you may not be able to qualify for an IRA depending on your salary and these other ones, but we can still do that. We can still contribute to a Roth IRA. We can still contribute to an HSA. We get the 401k in the form of our 403b. We get a second one called a 457b, and then we have $58,000 of headroom to fill in with this. That's made up of the contributions that UC makes to your pension, that you make to your pension or savings, and then whatever up to $58,000 you put in after tax. So I don't know who could save that much money if they needed to, but it's there. Like there's no reason not to at Berkeley to take advantage of these tax situations and keep more of your money. So I talked about taxes. The next one is fees, right? Fees, my former company, they were 2% fees, right? And it was terrible. So it was a good reason. When I came to Berkeley, I rolled over my 401k to Berkeley. And so this may be something for you folks that are recent to UC. You may be able to save a lot more money. Look at this graphic from Vanguard. If you were to pay no costs and invest $100,000, and let's see, they say 25 years of just earning 6%, you would have earned $33,000. But if you had 2% being shaved off the top by management every year, you would have lost to cost more than you would have made in earnings. And 2% was standard. And the good news for you guys is that Berkeley has cheap funds and no one is putting up with high management fees anymore. Here's a screenshot from our Berkeley page. If you look here, these are those target date funds I said before. Instead of 2%, it's 100th of a percent. And our equivalent of the US stock market index, right? It's 1,000, 1,000%. So very good fund options at Berkeley. Very cheap. Another thing that just people are buying at the wrong time, right? They hear on the news, everyone's making money on GameStop. I want to get in. So they buy high. And then everyone who's in the money, right, was out a long time ago. So these are here's just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 behavioral finance biases known. Here's my little shorthand for them. Other people people are losing money. I should sell, right? Then you just sold at the wrong time, right? Disposition effect, keeping losers, outcome bias. Like I made some good investments earlier in life, but that doesn't make me a good investment. That makes me lucky, right? Bandwagon bias, believing something because others believe it. This is what runs prices up, right? Fear of missing out. Law of small numbers, looking at a very small sample set and thinking you have, clairvoyance, right? Confirmation bias, hindsight bias. Warren Buffett himself said, be greedy when others are fearful and fearful when others are greedy. If you had taken that advice in March of last year, you would have a one in lifetime buying opportunity, right? And if you had put your savings into pre-tax accounts, you would have added significant girth to your snowball, right? And here's where I start wrapping it back up, right? Because compounding is real and it is magic, right? When if you put $1 in and you get, it doubles in a matter of years, right? That's pretty amazing, right? And then if you do that enough, you have this passive income, right? It's true of basically everything, right? And you're at a career development conference today to improve your skill, right? So when you lock in good habits, when you dump bad habits, when you ward off dragging fees, right? If you start treating your career with the same degree of, I don't know, almost greed, you're like, this is my time. I have to spend my time today getting better, right? You're going to start compounding your skills, right? I love this. You don't need to listen to me. Someone wrote an entire book on it called Atomic Habits. If you try to do 1% better every day, you end up 37 times better at the end of the year. And what I think a lot of those graphs I was sharing at the beginning of the talk show is that, it's that you don't think you're getting payoff until you're 10 years in. And then the payoff is just amazing, right? So are you learning something new each day, right? Like these little wins are going to have the snowball in your career, right? Just quickly, I love this graph, right? Because it shows a typical compounding, right? An exponential angle, right? But we tend to think linearly, right? So we're making these investments. We're taking this project management course, right? And it's nights and it's weekends and it's just really horrible. But what actually happens is you get the first job after that, you get the second job after the compounding starts happening, right? So my talk today was just basically telling you to save more money, right? But in understanding that there's smart ways to save more money, and you see we have a really nice mix of options. So figure out what your number is and develop a plan for getting there. First, back yourself up with an emergency fund and high interest debt, and then just put the savings on autopilot. Reduce your taxes, keep more of your money, put everything into pre-tax accounts if you can, right? Or tax advantage somehow. And just keep it really simple. And my recommendation is to start with a 1% contribution. That's going to force you to get in there, figure out which account you want to go and do and put one in. Put one into each of our unique accounts, right? If you can. And then just keep adding 1% each month until you have reached this point where you're saying, wow, I looked at that first chart in Dave's presentation and I wanted to go from 15 to 25, and you're there. right? See, take baby steps together, put 1% in a month, right? And thank me in 14 years. So that concludes the talk. I want to thank Jill, Kat, and Lisa for all their support over the last year while I put this together, and also the Now Program Committee, Catherine, Harpreet, Pam, and Tara, and Marcy and Hank, my family. They've heard this all a million times. Thank you. I have a lot of resource slides at the end, and I'll just click through them real quick, and then we'll ask questions. I'll just say what they are. So I have a bunch of links. I have a couple books that I read recently that I think are good for anyone seeking financial advice. I have all these fun calculators with links. For anyone who has put way too much into a 401k and needs to get the money early, here's stuff about the Roth conversion ladder, about how to get your money sooner. Here's another plug for Personal Capital. It's where you put all your accounts in one. I can recommend it if you're really trying to unpack your situation, but we all just went through this massive UC data breach. So I also fully understand if you do not want to give some company any of your personal information. Quick graphic about how that Roth conversion ladder works, how HSAs are the ultimate retirement account. Here is a screenshot click through of how to do a 1% contribution to your 457B, so nobody has any excuses, and more about how Atomic Habits can compound. And then if my talk has not been compelling enough to make you save, you should go on to use CNET benefits anyways because of the security breach. This was an announcement from campus, right? You should set up your two-step factor authentication anyways. So that concludes my talk. And Michael, if we can open it now for questions, maybe you could pick out a couple from chat or however you want to work.
Fabulous. Thanks so much, Dave. That was excellent. I love the way you just kind of summarized, the power of saving even a small amount, starting with that 1%. Thank you again. So now we've got a few minutes for Q&A. I copied and pasted a few of the questions from chat. We've got a lot of knowledge in the room, so many of them have been answered already. But I guess, Dave, if we can start with, there were several questions about the 403 and 457 plans and about maxes, and can you contribute to both of them? If you could just give us like a quick overview of those again, just to kind of clarify it for folks.
Yeah, and I had a slide in there with how at Berkeley you just have this edge that nobody else has, right? You can contribute to both, right? And you have consideration. The big one with the 403 is it's like a 401k, right? All the same rules basically apply. You can take a loan from it, right? So these are considerations from everyone else. Personal anecdote, I had to roll over my 401k, right? Did I want to roll it into the 403B or into the 457K, right? Or 457, right? Do I want to prioritize being able to take a loan from it, or do I want to prioritize getting it early? That's basically it. And in my case, I want to buy a house someday. So I put it into the 403B so that I could take a loan if I needed to. And you can contribute to both, yes.
Fabulous. We have just randomly, please put your question in the chat. We are recording the chat, or we're going to save the chat, and Dave's going to address these more directly. But we do have some questions on the HSA. Can you talk a little bit about that program?
Yeah, HSAs are very, very often misunderstood. And I think I said in my old job, it was the only one available. So for some people, they don't have any choice, right? What the HSA is a high deductible plan. So, everyone knows what deductible is, right? You get in an accident, your out of pocket is $500 on a low deductible plan. On a high deductible plan, it's $5,000, right? So it's a high deductible plan. So you're taking this high deductible, but you're being able to just throw money in it every year. And so once you've reached that deductible, let's say it's 5,000, you're okay, right? The downside to it is at my old company, it was a bunch of young people who never got hurt, right? And that's okay for them, right? But for I ended up having a child during this. And so I had a massively inconvenient insurance situation that year because of the HSA. So I really do think everyone needs to look at it. And if you, basically, if you can save up to the deductible, you're okay. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who is, you know, not backed up for the deductible, but it has some really interesting features in that, you know, if you cease putting in $500 every year and let's say you're not spending it, you have this large pool of money that you can use for your medical expenses for the rest of your life, for your spouse, for your children. You can use it at the drugstore. You can always just get it reimbursed and you never pay tax on it. And then if it's compounding in the market, right, you can invest it. It's not like your FSA. You can invest the money. And if it makes gains, you can take them out when you're 65, like a regular retirement account. So once you're 65, it becomes a regular retirement account.
Thank you, Dave. Monica writes, going into the Fidelity account and increasing contributions during this time. And that's what we all should be doing. Dave, do you have any suggestions on how often we should go in and check out our accounts? Or, you know, you said 1%, just immediately just start like today. Any other advice of how often we should go in?
I think everyone should just take that advice, because that's what got me started on it. My financial situation was, I lived cheap, not because I knew any of this. I lived cheap because I had this whole Occupy Wall Street, ad busters, punk, stick it to the man sort of upbringing, right? And I was like not consumerist, right? And then I learned about this, just about how to flip that whole paradigm on its head, right? It's not necessarily about high earning, right? It's a combination. So I would think putting 1% in, because 1% is not hard for anyone to digest. And you'll see that it doesn't even reduce your paycheck by 1% because of the tax savings.
Yep. We've got other questions on additional HSA questions regarding Kaiser and, you know, just who's eligible.
I saw that one. It's kind of funny. My old HSA was a Kaiser, but the HSA through Berkeley, it's not. It's Blue Shield, right? So it's a little more complicated. And, you know, I, for example, I chose not to use it when I came here because I had my Kaiser doctor who delivered my child. I wanted to keep, you know, so everyone's situation will be different, and, you know, research it thoroughly before, you know, subjecting your family to a high deductible health plan that they didn't sign up for, right? So that one is a little bit more complicated, and don't worry about it. You know, there's a lot more accounts at Berkeley to get the tax advantages.
Yep. Eric Smith writes, please clarify the 1% savings.
I'm just saying, because you have automatically taken out of your paycheck 7%, right, from either the pension or the savings program. I'm just recommending that everyone do what they always say in those retirement seminars, which is the supplemental accounts, right? You have all these supplemental accounts, and they're not just there to be confusing. They were set up as a benefit to us university employees to give us a tax benefit, right? So that's why I suggest 1%. And 1% is based on nothing other than it's a small number. It's easy to digest. If you looked at those charts at the beginning, I would start thinking in fives. Try to save 5% addition, right? Even for a year, you know, whatever. And it changes all the time, right? Your situation is going to change.
It looks like, is that 1 minute to go, or do we have more time?
We have 15 more minutes.
Questions on home buying. Folks want to know about, home buying. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
You should talk to somebody else about that.
Okay.
I've never purchased a home. I want to so bad. I live in a little apartment, and I have a 3-year-old, and he's like peeling the paint off the walls, right?
So we'll have for them for those who are maybe closer to home buying or just interested in how it works with savings. And
I included some links in the resources. You know, I in that rent buy calculator, I think is a really interesting one, because what that does is it puts it into perspective, the time frame, like how long you actually plan to live in the house, right? And what I was suggesting in the slide was that real estate is an investment, but if buying a house comes with a huge upfront payment, a lot of transaction costs, right? You're paying two parties a transaction fee. You're paying property taxes and maintenance and things like that that may be unpredictable. And if you're a landlord, you have to work, right? You have to do things. And then so if you just want to be in real estate, right, you can invest in it. For example, the UC real estate fund, and then you're, letting someone else take care of property management and all that. So it's a low cost, low headache, low work way to, and I would defer to anyone with more experience than me on buying your first home. But one thing I just tied in there was that you can use your 403B. You can take loans from that. And that's very common. People use that to supplement their down payment for their home. You do have to pay it back though, but you can pay it back over time coming straight out of your paycheck, right?
Dave, for those of us who would love to buy a home, but we're interested also, but we may or may not, so we're interested in the REITs. Can you mentioned them earlier, and that we can all kind of invest in real estate. Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Sure. I think if you invest in those target date funds, you'll have to look at them. They most likely include them. They're very much considered kind of part of a diversified mix, right, of investments. You have stocks, you have bonds. It's a way for you to get that slice in your pie chart of real estate without owning buildings, right? And so REITs, real estate investment trust, they're like stocks, they're traded. So they do pay dividends. So, they make money and they pay it out every year. For example, I was looking at one the other day. It was, there was some statistic, right? If you had $60,000, it would pay $2,000 a year in dividends, for example. That's just an example, right? So it does make dividends for you, but when you sell it, right, it goes up and down like a stock. So you own a little share in the trust.
Thank you. DCP accounts. What about them in relation to Roth IRAs? Does it make sense to roll the DCP account into a Roth IRA to save on those fees, or what are your thoughts on that?
So there's something really unique, and if you go to the UC retirement seminars, which I recommend everyone does, they're super enthusiastic about this mega backdoor Roth thing, which used to be on the fringes, right? When you hear something called mega backdoor Roth, what is that, right? I had a slide at the end, which basically means if you transfer some money from whatever account it is to your Roth, it has to sit there for 5 years before you can take it penalty free. And so you set up like this ladder, right, where you put in, what's your number, right? I need to spend $40,000 in retirement, right? So you put $40,000 and you wait 5 years, then you can spend it penalty free. And with the automatic payroll deductions into the DCP after tax program, there's a lot of acronyms, right? If you invest there, you can, and it's really weird, you have to make a phone call to Fidelity and then you can transfer it over to your Roth. And they'll explain this in the retirement center seminar. I'm sure you've all got those emails. Sign up for it, ask questions. They're very helpful. But it's a way, if you had a 401k from your old company, it did really well. You're like, well, I can't touch it for another 10 years, 5 years, whatever it is. It's a way to move it into Roth so you can access it penalty free. You do have to be 5 years ahead of the ball. So think of it now, but the action you can take today is to set up a Roth IRA if you haven't had one. So you need one to make that work. So set it up if you don't, with a $1 contribution.
Thank you. There's the discussion of borrowing from the 403. What are your thoughts on that?
Ideally, you would have planned it so perfectly that you would never borrow from your retirement fund, right? Because that's your retirement fund. So you're borrowing from you're taking money from an old lady, right? In a way, or your older self, right? And, but if your circumstances have changed, you can definitely take a loan from it. I'll just reveal my situation, right? I had this idea that I was just going to race towards early retirement. And then I had a family and life became more expensive. And preschool at UC is $25,000 a year, so you change it around a little bit. kind of lost track of my line of thought there, but Michael, remind me what the question was.
Let me see.
Oh, borrowing from the 401,
Yeah,
right? So you
yeah.
can borrow from it tax-free, or excuse me, penalty-free. So you take the money out, and then it's yours to use, but you have to pay it back to your 403b, or else you pay a 10% penalty. Right. So with the 457 by contrast, right, that's the one where you can take it out when you leave UC, but you can't take a loan from it. If you were to take money out of it, you would pay a 10% penalty.
Wow.
In
Don't
addition,
take it out.
Depending on your situation, you may need it.
You may need
so
it,
it is there.
Yeah. There's some discussion in the chat box about, those of us who have taken on work that was high value and high meaning, but, we're trying to catch up financially. It may not have paid as much. And I really, for me, it makes you feel a little bit like, well, maybe I'm a little more inhibited to set aside money if your income is not that high. How do you balance that? How do you balance a modest income versus the need to save?
I know that's the big challenge, right? And that's why everyone is on there on a different level. When I graduated from college, right, I lived in the same house with like 15 people in a 4-bedroom house, and managed to save despite, at that time, very low income, right? And then I spent 10 years at a quite low income compared to Berkeley job, and just through, I just make a lot of sacrifices, right? I literally walk to work in the rain, right, instead of driving, just to try to get ahead of that. I threw out numbers like, if you could save 15%, right, you only have to work for 14 years, right? Realistic for no one, but in the Bay Area. But you can aspire to that, and maybe for 1 year you can figure it out. Maybe you can figure out how to do it, and then just getting ahead of that, getting money into the Snowball soon, and trying to save some serious money on taxes.
Yep, thank you. That's, you mentioned saving money on taxes. I know I always think of tax savings as something that someone who has a lot of money or is making a lot of money is concerned with, and I'm like, well, somebody rich and cheap and don't want to pay their fair share. And that's, some bias that I personally have, but I really do. You've really helped me see, and I'm sure for others too, the importance of tax savings, even at modest incomes. I appreciate that.
It gives you an edge. I have the same bias, right? When you hear about someone in a tax shelter, right, who pays zero tax and they're living large, right? Nobody wants to do that. And I'm not suggesting that. I'm suggesting using the tools that the IRS created for us as a benefit, that was listed when we were hired. So.
Yep. Lots of very good advice and experience in the chat box. Thank you, Isabel, Sandra. Yeah, we appreciate this collective wisdom. And there was a discussion earlier about an investment savings staff org on campus, which is something that I never thought of. Thanks, Daryl, for that tip.
I'd love to participate.
I don't know if this is something that we would all want to pursue further, but it's a great idea. And, these are reminders that, you get going and you think, oh, we're getting a 3% raise. How fantastic. The last thing I want to do, since we didn't get a raise last year, is take some of that money and not even touch it. But we could probably get a lot more out of the 3% if we invested it, or at least portion of it if we can. So
it takes a mindset change. I used to be the same way, right? 5%, $500 bonus, woohoo, $500 guitar.
Right.
But now it's, I could put that in and put my little elf to work, right?
Absolutely. Euro makes a good point that, DCP used to be automatically deducted. And so with, I guess we need to make our own contributions now, more of them than in times past, when the funds were funded different ways.
I think it's a unique time because lots of people, hopefully in the audience, were able to save a little bit. And there was a note in there I see about, be careful about how much you put into pre-tax, right? Because you might be taxed more in retirement. That is absolutely true. The Roth pre-tax thing is basically, if you expect to be rich in retirement, Roth may be the way to go. If you expect to be, like I was saying, like, try to maintain the standard of living you're doing now, projecting that into the future, your tax situation would be the same or even less, right? Because you're not earning 60,000, you're only taking out 40,000, whatever, so if you expect to be making less in retirement, then the pre-tax is the way to go. Then if you expect to have a very large inheritance or high income in retirement, then Roth. So that's a whole nother conversation.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. We do have another question on the UC matching plan, the 8%. Is that Dave, can you talk a little bit?
So when I was hired, there's the savings choice, pension choice, right? And they're kind of like chipping away at the pension. And that's more like a traditional match. They take 7%, or which you volunteer for, voluntold, right? I love that word. You put in 7% and then they put in 8%. If you're on the pension, they take 7% of your paycheck, put it into the pension plan, into the pool, and then they make a contribution. I think last time I checked, they said it was like 14%, but it doesn't really matter to you because it doesn't change the amount you get in your pension, right? Because your pension benefit is defined by service credit, years, and age of retirement.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. We have a couple more comments and questions. Harrison.
So you don't get a match, by the way. You don't get any match on supplemental.
Okay.
Just to clarify.
Thanks for clarifying that. So it's our contribution. So we have to go in and add money to programs. Wow, lots of more questions. And looks like we've got about 3 minutes. So just to clarify, Dave, we'll record down all the questions and then I'll send them to you. And then we can kind of go from there.
If anyone would like to, I'll put my email in the chat again. Just email me your questions too if we weren't able to get to it, and I'm happy to help.
Fabulous. Thank you. Dave, any last minute comments you'd like to make? Maybe if it's based on some of the chat or anything else you want to give us for reminders, takeaways. If there's one thing we need from your presentation, what do we talk about 2 weeks from now?
Save 1% more and thank me when you look at how much that snowball, 14 years if it doubled, right? Thank me when it doubles. And big thanks to the Now Committee too, because you guys, I wouldn't have done it without all the encouragement. So
Dave, thank you. Thank you so much. We will definitely keep you in mind when we have the results from our snowballed 1%. Everyone, thank you so much for your, wait, we still have 2 minutes.
I'm here till the end and I can stay.
Yeah, wow. Well, that's the Aaron just, thank you all. There's a lot of thank yous coming in and Aaron just went in now. Everyone, please make a commitment to go in. It's Dave, where do we go?
Well, if you have my slides go to the very end, and that's where the resources are. It's Fidelity Net Benefits. If you want to do a quick Google search, you're going to use, well, I think you have to use your social security number and your login. If you haven't set it up yet, right, there's that whole data breach. So this is another reason, right? Not that it's going to happen or we're reason to believe, but you don't want anyone else claiming your account, right? So that's a good.
Excellent. Thank you. Heather reminds us we'll go in now, but the changes will take place next pay period. So keep that in mind. We won't see it. That 1% should disappear without us seeing it, and we'll start that snowball. Thank you.
That's a good note that it does take a month to hit, right? So if you change your contribution today and then you change it tomorrow and you change it, it's not going to keep changing it. It takes a paycheck to kick in. So I'm glad you're all out there.
Yes, please take a few moments to complete the survey. Let us know what worked, and we will save the chat. And thank you for attending. Enjoy the rest of the conference, everyone.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.